Okay, good morning. Thanks for those who attended and those who have joined us online. We do have quite a big agenda today for us. It's usually one or two, but there are a couple today. So we'll get cracking. I waited a couple of minutes for some late arrivals, but they haven't turned up. Okay, we are quorate, so we can start. Today's meeting is being filmed for live and subsequent broadcast by the Wales Council's internet site. The images and sound recordings may also be used for trading purposes within the Council. As you will see from the agenda papers, generally the public seating areas are not filmed. However, by entering the meeting room and using the public seating area, you are consenting to be filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or trading purposes. Proposed public speakers have been made aware of the broadcasting arrangements prior to this meeting. Would members please use their microphone to contribute to the meeting, and please remember to switch off the microphone when you have finished. Members dialing in remotely, please only turn on your camera when you wish to speak, and please remember to switch it off when you have finished. Also, could you ensure that you refrain from using any mobile devices during the committee and that any of these devices are on silent? Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any apologies, Taylor, please? Just Councillor Jones, thank you. Does anybody have any declarations of interest today? No?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, Chair.
Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Spedd. Councillor Screen, sorry.
Yeah, yes, Chair. Item 1 on the agenda, I've got a declaration of interest. I was involved in that before I came on to Planning Committee, so I should not speak or get involved in that one.
Is that correct? Okay, one sec. It's a case of do you not want to, or are you open to...
I don't think I should get involved in any
then.
discussion.
If you'd rather not, then if you can refrain, that'd be good. Thank you. Councillor Owls?
Yeah, there's an application towards the end from Councillor James Peterson, who's a ward colleague of mine.
Okay. I think that's okay. You can, open-minded, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Chair, could I make a
Councillor
declaration
Reynolds,
as well,
yes.
please?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Councillor Reynolds.
Oh, yes, sorry. I just want to mention the fact that on the second item today, 23/0521, I just want to, just for clarity really and transparency, that I've known Liam and his family for quite a few years, so it won't have any effect on obviously my judgment or my decisions, but I just thought I should mention that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, we go on to item number 1. Sorry, minutes of the last meeting held on the 2nd of August. That's wrong, that isn't it? It's got to be that's a printing error. So it's got to be on the November's meeting. Okay. I'm not going to go through them page by page as usual. Can somebody please propose them as a true record? Thank you, Councillor Jordan and Councillor Owell second. Thank you. Right. Oh, God, I clicked on something here now. Okay, application number 1, which is 230379, which is Whitegate, and this will be presented by Stephen Williams, which will be done online, I believe. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Can you see my presentation, Chair? And can you hear me?
Yes, can see and hear you. Thanks. Could it be blown up? Or is that as big as it gets?
That's as big as it gets.
Okay.
Okay, the site is situated in a row of 4 detached properties in a rural lane on Outfall Lane, which is in the Western Levels. The site is countryside, allocated as Green Wedge in the local development plan, and a site of special scientific interest. The application is proposing to demolish an existing bungalow and construct a new bungalow on the site, on the land that's hatched blue on that plan there. The application has been reported to Planning Committee at the request of Councillor Howells, and a late representation report was issued yesterday, which you should have all received.
Sorry, Steve,
So
before we go on, have you all received a late representation? Yeah, okay, thank you.
So this gives you a better idea of where the site is located. So this is the main drag that comes through the Western Levels, so it's to the west of St Bride's. And the 4 properties that I just showed you on the drawing there are situated right at the northern end of Outfall Lane. So these are the 4 properties on the site here, which I'm circling with my cursor, is the site we're looking at. So just to give you some street scene photographs of the lane, this is the first property that you see when you enter Outfall Lane off the main road. So you can see it's just a low-level bungalow with a pitch roof. Then the next property along is called Willowbrook. Again, a bungalow, but this one's got sort of 2 gable features. This is the site that we're looking at. So this is the bungalow that's proposed to be demolished. And then this property here is the last in the row, and that property is known as Greenfields. That's just a close-up of Greenfields. So again, just a sort of a hip roof building. This just provides an indication of the current layout. So you can see in this sort of purplish colour the footprint of the existing bungalow. There were some outbuildings, which you can see also shown, but they've since been demolished. And that's just some elevations on a floor plan to show you the design and appearance of the existing bungalow. Very low-level bungalow, pitched roof. You can see it's only got ground floor accommodation at the moment. This is a layout plan. So the dark hatched line is the footprint of the existing bungalow. And then this grey block is the footprint of the proposed. So you can see it's coming slightly closer towards Outfall Lane than the existing bungalow, and it's wider as well. This is the proposed ground floor. So the dark line is the footprint of the proposed. This diagonal hatching is the footprint of the existing bungalow. The red line shows a scheme that was presented to officers at pre-application stage for a much larger development, which we advised the applicant was too large. But they've included that on the drawing just to show that they have negotiated with us and reduced the size of the scheme compared to what they originally wanted to do. And then this is the proposed first floor. So in the roof, you've got 4 bedrooms, a cinema, dressing room, and an ensuite bathroom. So this is the proposed front elevation. So you can see it's got sort of a mansard style roof with a pitched gable projection and sort of dormer windows on the front and on the back. Just also to note from this drawing, this dotted line here is the maximum height of Greenfields, so the pitch of Greenfields. This is the height of that property. So they've brought the height down to sort of match the height of Greenfields. The red line shows the outline of a scheme that was presented at pre-application stage. So you can see that what they originally wanted to do was much larger. This is the rear elevation proposed. So you can see some dormers on the back there. This is a side elevation, which is the southern side elevation. And then a street view, just to give you some sort of an idea of what this will look like in the lane relative to the neighbouring properties. So you can see it matches the height, the maximum height of Greenfields. It's much wider across the plot than the existing property. It is higher than this property to the north, Willowbrook, but it's got this cable feature which sort of reflects the gables on this property here. So in terms of the issues then, the officer report has set out the planning policies to be taken into account. In particular, this is Green Wedge, policy SP7 seeks to restrict the increase in the size of replacement dwellings to no more than 30% of the original dwelling. And then we've got policy H12, which relates to replacement dwellings in the countryside. And that sets out the same restriction of 30%. And the reason for this policy is to prevent a situation where you get much larger replacement dwellings being provided, which over time can erode the rural character of an area. And also in this case, because we're in Green Wedge, the Green Wedge policy seeks to reduce harm to the openness of the area. So that's the reason for this restriction. Now the proposed dwelling has been calculated to be 59% larger than the existing dwelling. So it is acknowledged that this scheme does not comply with our policy criteria. However, we must also consider to what extent this policy contravention is actually harmful to the amenities of the area on the ground in reality. And as discussed in the report, the dwelling has been designed to increase the floor space of what is a very modest bungalow at the moment, whilst trying to minimise the visual impact of the scheme. And, you know, for the reasons outlined in the report, we consider the scheme is acceptable. We think that they've reduced the scale and the height of it to an extent which is something that won't have an undue impact on the openness of the Green Wedge. Concerns have been expressed by neighbours about the design, and in particular we've had concern expressed about the mansard style roof, and the comments being that this is not typical for the properties in the area. But the properties, as you can see from the photographs we've shown you, they are all quite mixed in design terms. You know, there's a mix of pitched and hipped. There's no sort of standard design. So on balance, we don't think that the proposal would be harmful or unduly harmful to the character of the lane. Moving on to ecology, the site, as I said earlier, is located within a site of special scientific interest. And the reason it's been allocated that is because of important flora and fauna that lives within the drainage ditches within the levels. So obviously we've had to consult with Natural Resources Wales. One of the main issues that's come out of this is the need for the applicant to have undertaken a foul drainage assessment, because it's not been feasible for them to connect to the public sewerage system. The existing property isn't connected to the mainstream system, and because the connection is of a certain distance away, it's simply not financially viable for them to do that. So they've had to explore other foul drainage options. and in particular they've looked at the possibility of a packaged treatment plant, which is a private facility that treats the waste. The problem with that is that it relies on runoff. It's treated, but only to a certain extent. So the runoff, there's potential for it to run into the drainage ditches and cause harm to the ecology of the area. So after a significant amount of negotiation, discussion with Natural Resources Wales, we've come to the conclusion that a packaged treatment plant is not a viable option. And so the only option left really is a cesspit, which is the least desirable option. But on balance, the existing property has got a cesspit. We don't know what the condition of that cesspit is. So what we will have is a new cesspit constructed to modern standards. So in that sense, we would be securing betterment over the existing situation. In terms of flood risk, the site is within a flood zone, being located within the levels. But again, the proposal is to replace an existing dwelling, which is subject to the same flood risk. So the proposal is acceptable. We've not had any objection from Natural Resources Wales. In terms of neighbouring amenity, we don't think that the building is unduly overbearing. You can see that a light test has been done, which is visible here. So the neighbouring property at Greenfields have got some side-facing windows. So obviously we need to make sure that the building wouldn't have an adverse impact on light to these rooms. So our supplementary planning guidance sets out a test. So a 45-degree test going up from the window, which the proposed building shouldn't obstruct that, and you can see that it doesn't. And in this direction, obviously there's plenty of space, so there's no adverse impact on neighbours in terms of overbearing impact. In terms of planning history, so there was a previous planning application early in the year which we refused under Office of Delegated Powers, and we refused it for 3 reasons. First reason was the design. The design, there was concern about the foul drainage, and there was concern about impact on privacy. So you can see that how the scheme has been amended from that scheme to overcome those issues. So on the left is the current scheme that we're looking at today, and on the right are the plans for the scheme that was refused. So taking the front elevation first, you can see the scheme was different because it had these sort of side dormers here that extended back along the side, and they've been removed. So we didn't like the design. There's a dormer on the back as well. All that's been taken off. So now we've not got a dormer on the side, and we've got these dormers in the back instead of like little pitched dormers instead of this big flat roof dormer. So we think that the design concerns we raised last time have now been addressed. In terms of the foul drainage, which obviously we didn't have the information on the previous application, we didn't have that assessment to go through the options, which we do now have. So that issue is considered to be overcome. And then on the previous scheme as well, there were windows at first floor level proposed, which would have overlooked neighbouring gardens. And as you can see, those have been taken off as well. So there's no loss of privacy with this scheme either. Finally, just to show you the block plan. So in terms of access, it's going to come off the existing access. So there's no change. It's not intensifying development. It's obviously we're losing one dwelling and having a replacement. So there's no concern about visibility, and there's sufficient area within the front to park and to turn. So highways have got no objection. So to conclude, we recommended that the Planning Commission be granted. We did have some late representations from the neighbour at Greenfields was expressed concern about the accuracy of the calculations relating to the increase in the volume of the proposed dwelling over the existing. We've, as you can imagine, the building is extremely complex sort of volume to calculate. We've had the calculations from the architect, and they've shown an increase of 59%. The neighbour, Greenfields, is disputing that. They're not saying what they think the volume is, but they're simply disputing it and saying that they don't think it's correct. And they're referring to a previous report on the previous application where there seems to be a discrepancy in the figures. From our perspective, we are being absolutely clear with you that the increase is contrary to policy, and the plans are there in front of you to obviously assess what that impact is and whether you think the impact in terms of the increase is acceptable or not. So that's it from me for now.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Before we go any further, Tina, for the rare occasion we got the sun out and it's come straight into my face. Could you close the curtains, please? Well, thank you. Not many people say that to me, I can tell you. Thank you very much. It's not shining on me no more, no. Okay, thank you. We do have a public speaker. Mr. Howells, would you like to speak? Please, do you have 5 minutes? 5 minutes, please, to say what you read.
Okay. Thank you for your time at this committee. We have been in the planning process for over 1 year and have followed the recommended planning process set by the planning department. As such, we have done the pre-application prior to full application. During each step, we have followed the recommendations by the planning department and the consultants who have acted on behalf of the council. Everything which we have been asked of us in terms of providing further documentation, we have provided further documentation to support our application we have provided. We have always appointed highly skilled specialists within their fields to provide very high quality documentation within a very timely manner, which has come at great expense, but it has satisfied any concerns which the consultants or the planning department may have had. In turn, this has left us with no outstanding concerns or objections, which has been overseen at managerial level. Throughout the process, we have made numerous design revisions to take into consideration comments we have received from both neighbours and planning officers. We have even made a number of revisions to the design and landscaping scheme which we did not have to based on planning grounds, but did so to try and satisfy neighbouring concerns. Just to highlight, only 2 neighbours' concerns raised out of the 31 members within the close community which were consulted about our application. We appreciate that only the concerns raised are from our immediate neighbours, although the other 2 households within the lane did not raise any objections. Can I also bring to your attention the previous planning applications for our property? Planning application 95/0239 was for accommodation within the roof space and the required building work. This was granted by the planning department with a roof height which was greater than what we have proposed today. All of the properties along Alfour Lane originally had the same footprint as we currently have. However, over the years they have either been demolished and rebuilt, or extensions have been added to give them the size of which they are today. Our home is the only one which is most similar to the original footprint from when it was built. We have proposed a family home to occupy 2 adults and young children. The footprint is now in line with all the other bungalows along the lane, plus the maximum height is the same as Greenfields, which has roof accommodation within their roof space, or to be precise, is 0.08 to a metre different, which is less than the width of your hand. Also, to add a further point, when you take into consideration that our plot had a large number of outbuildings which all add to the built form of the plot, this brings the overall footprint increase below 30%. We have created the most open space and separation between the boundaries on either side of our property than either neighbouring properties, which ultimately benefits the landscape. This is in comparison to Greenfields, whose extension, which houses an Airbnb business, is built on the common boundary, leaving zero openness, plus a separate triple garage which practically removes most of the openness throughout the whole of their plot, notwithstanding the 7 to 8 foot wooden fence which is built on the highway boundary. Our landscape scheme offers a number of benefits, such as it greatly improves on the condition of the plot as we acquired it, benefits the landscape and the area in which it is situated in, and improves on the biodiversity of the local area. This has been welcomed by the landscaping consultant for the council. An important document requested by the landscape consultant was to provide a landscape visual appraisal. This was required in order to demonstrate that what we have proposed does not negatively impact the local environment from an immediate view and from a wider view of the open countryside. The result was the impact was negligible and does not harm the landscape. The scheme approved actually benefits the surroundings, which again was welcomed from the landscape consultant with no outstanding concerns or objections. In terms of design, we feel what we have proposed is most definitely in keeping with this rural location, plus we have used similar designs as the other properties along Outfall Lane. In regards to the resubmission, we have never had any concerns raised with the proposed not being in keeping and appropriate for its location. To highlight 2 points from neighbouring submitted comments, I quote Greenfield's comments: "We have no objections with the footprint, as this brings the proposed property in line with the other 4 bungalows in the lane," end quote. I also quote Willowbrook's comments: "The general design is more in keeping with neighbouring properties," end quote.
Okay, Mr. Williams, if you could sum up, please.
Okay. I would just like to mention the SABS application. This was submitted in July, and it's based off the landscape scheme proposed. To finish, the process has been incredibly long and has come with some financial impacts which delays have contributed to. We trust in the planning process and all the consultants which act for the council. We have followed the correct process from start and satisfied all policies and areas which we needed to address from our standing concerns or objections.
Okay,
thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Ms. Morland, you don't wish to speak, no? No, okay. And we do have a Rebecca Ployce who's unable to attend, who's down to speak, but she has sent in the late representation papers that you've received. Okay? Okay, thank you very much. So we'll go over to the committee now if they have anything to... Councillor Mogford?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the... Councillor Howells has requested that the application is presented to Planning Committee due to potential impact with regards to character and appearance. Did Councillor Howells send in any other further information that I may have missed?
Not that I'm aware of.
So Councillor Rhiann Howells is asking us to look at this on the basis of character and appearance. Okay. It's interesting to listen to the officer's report on policies and the flexibility that they have, because policies are principles. Yeah. This does deviate a fair bit from the policy, but listening to the gentleman over there, I mean, and the area itself seems to have evolved. I think that I don't see how that we have any. I have any strong objections.
Okay, Councillor Jordan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a bit of a concern that's all for me is with the cesspit. Is it actually outside the build, outside on the top of the land or underground? And if so, you know, what is going to be encased in something? And also, what size was the original property, bedroom-wise, and with the new capacity of 4,000 to 5,000 litres, is that acceptable, or is that much more than what the cesspit was beforehand?
Steve, can you answer that?
Yes, okay, no problem. So the existing property then, you can see is a 2-bedroom property. We don't have any details on the current cesspit. We don't know what the capacity of it is. but we are imposing a planning. If the application is approved, then we're imposing a planning condition to require details of the new cesspit, and obviously the specifications of it and the capacity and so forth can be resolved at that stage. My understanding is that a cesspit is essentially a sealed pit in the ground, and it's emptied periodically by some sort of tanker. That's how it works. That's it, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I know some cesspits actually are above ground. I mean, and also in buildings. So I was just thinking if it was going to be above ground or underground, and also with that 45,000 litres, would that more and capacity more to actually fill for 4 bedrooms? Also with the waste from the rain and everything else, where's the waste going to go from that? Is it going to go straight into the ground as a soak away as such, or would that go into the cesspit as well?
Sorry, it broke up a little bit on me there then. Could you repeat the question, sorry?
Yes, I know some cesspits can actually be above ground to me as well, because I've been in a property where I've had a cesspit outside, and there's a building in the building. With the 2-bedroom to what it is now, would that be enough capacity for the 45,000 litres to capacity for 4 people for a 4-bedroom house? And also with the water, the rainwater, and everything else, would that go into the soak away, into the ground, or would that actually go into the cesspit as well?
Right. Okay. So the surface water drainage will be dealt with by the sustainable drainage scheme that they'd have to submit. So sustainable drainage is a separate consenting regime to planning now. So that would be dealt with by our highways team. I would have thought they would look to see, they would probably try and get the surface water to percolate into the ground in the same way that it does now. Clearly the building's got a larger footprint, so the surface water would be increasing compared to the existing property, and they would have to sort of undertake percolation tests as part of that to establish how that's going to work. But that's a separate consent. I doubt that they would be diverting the surface water into the cesspit, because that would be very expensive, because the cesspit option is essentially a sealed pit that has to be emptied out by tanker, and obviously that's an expensive thing to do. So I would have thought the surface water would be dealt with by percolating into the ground. Does that answer the question?
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, Chair. I haven't my hand up for a
Oh,
while.
yeah. Sorry, Councillor Reynolds.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks, Steve, for the presentation as well. I must admit, it's a bit like Councillor Mogford said. I'm pretty well minded to agree with the Council recommendations on this, or the Officer recommendations. My main concern was the cesspit, but as you said in your presentation, I think the new cesspit that's going to be installed is going to be an improvement of what was there anyway. So, sort of common sense dictates that even though it's the least desirable option, it would be a bit daft, I think, to refuse it on those grounds. My main concern, to be honest, is it's not a concern. I'm quite pleased actually. We seem to be using a common sense approach in terms of the 30% limit and exceeding that. The policy says it shouldn't exceed 30%, but we seem to be using common sense in that, which I'm really pleased to see. My only concern now is where would we stand legally if this was granted and an appeal was put in to say, well, hang on, you haven't followed your own policies. Where do we stand legally on that? Because I'm all for applying common sense, but are we okay on that legally? Thanks.
Andrew,
thank you, Councillor Reynolds. In terms of, so as with anything in planning, the starting point is always the development plan. So we've got to consider whether a proposal is in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. As we've expressed in the report in this case, it does exceed it, but the amplification of the planning policy says, well, the main issue is just because there's a breach of planning policy, what's the harm of that breach? That's what we've got to consider. In this case, the policy seeks to protect the openness of the countryside and the green wedge. What we're saying is, in context, the design, scale, visual impact of this proposal is acceptable. So, notwithstanding, it's gone over the 30%. When you look at the proposals as a whole, we think they're acceptable. So, as I said, we've considered it, we've outlined it to you. You're aware there's a breach, that, you know, there's no confusion on that point. We've shown you the plans, the existing and the proposed, and we think it's acceptable. So, the plans could be challenged, as with any decision, but as I said, we think it's a robust decision when everything's been considered, all material considerations.
Okay, thank you.
That's great, thanks.
Councillor Perkins?
Morning.
Yeah.
I believe my question has just been answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cox?
I notice on the neighbours' representation that there is a reference to the close proximity of traffic coming into the new development. I think it states that it comes within close proximity of a window. I think it's, if I recall, it's the dining room window. And on the plan, I mean, I am minded actually to approve this, and obviously reading the report, listening to the officer's report. But it did seem on the plan that we've just been shown that the traffic coming on and off the site is really going to be incredibly close proximity to the neighbouring house. And the question I have really, is it not possible in the design to actually do something to mitigate that, to actually maybe take the traffic a little further away? I mean, looking at the diagram we were shown, it was, I don't know the exact distance, but it did look very, very, very close.
Steve, can you come back?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Bear with me, sorry. I'll just find the... So you can see the existing driveway in this photograph. There, you can see the existing driveway here. So when you look at you can see it's right next to the garage there. When you look at, it's for here. And what they're proposing is just to keep it the way it is. So it's no worse than the current situation. And that's what they're asking us to assess the application on, and we don't have any grounds to resist that. So whilst a slightly different location might be preferable to a neighbour, at the end of the day, this is what they want to do, and we have no grounds, in my opinion, to resist that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else wish to ask any questions? No? Okay, so we go to the vote. The recommendation is granted with conditions. Could all those...
Can you ask members to put their cameras up, please?
Sorry. Okay. Can the members please put their cameras on so we can see your hands? So the recommendation... So do we have a proposal for the recommendation and a seconder? Please, thank you. All those in favour of the recommendation for granted with conditions, please raise hands. Okay, thank you. That's passed unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, speakers. Sorry? He doesn't want to vote. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. okay if we just let the speakers show their emotions before they leave, then you're quite welcome to leave when you're... Okay, if you if you don't mind, my water tablets are hitting in, so I'm going to ask for a little comfort break while I go to the toilet. Okay, thank you. Because the next one, I think, is one. Okay, thank you. So we'll now go on to item number 2, which is 23/0521. Before we start, Councillor Reynolds, you wanted to declare an interest. What was the interest again, please?
Sorry about that, I couldn't get my camera to come on then. It's just that I've known one of the speakers today, Liam McGoldrick. I've known him and his family for a few years. So I just wanted to make that clear. I say it's not going to have any effect on my decision making, but I just thought I should be open about that.
Speakers. When you say speaker, is that somebody? Was that an agent or objector? Right.
I'm sorry, Chair. I can't hear what's being said.
Sorry. Is it the person you know? Is it an agent or an objector or? What's your relationship to the person you know?
A long-standing friend.
Okay.
Right. Well, the advice would be, if you have a close association with him, that it's not really a question of whether you think that it affects your judgment. It's a question of whether the public would think it would affect you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's why I raised it. Yeah.
So. My advice to you would be not to participate in this one, so that because the public could well think that it's going to infect your relationship with him. It's going to affect your impartiality.
If that's your advice, I'll abide by that. I mean, I know in myself that I'll be totally fair and impartial. But I understand what the public perception could be, so yeah. If your advice is to stand aside, then I will.
Yes, you need to turn off the camera, and if you could, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Okay, thank you. The presenting officer is Joanne Davison. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. The application is for the development of 2 light industrial units or offices, 2 A3 use drive-through units and associated works. The application is being presented to you today at the request of Councillor Cochrane and Councillor Fairweather. By way of introduction, the proposal is to build a KFC and a Starbucks along with 2 B1 industrial units and associated works on the site of the Thames Valley Construction Yard in Crinder. The site is hatched in blue on the slide in front of you. The overall site area is 0.8 of a hectare and is currently in use by Thames Valley Construction. A building that was previously on the site several years ago now has been demolished, and the site is now occupied for external storage of materials. The proposed buildings will provide 470 square metres of A3 floor space, 300 square metres of B1 industrial or office space, 65 parking spaces, that's 14 spaces for the new B1, 2 of which will have charging and 2 disabled, 12 for the retained Thames Valley construction offices, 2 of which will be disabled, 20 spaces for KFC, with 2 charging and 2 disabled spaces, and 19 spaces for Starbucks with 2 disabled and 2 charging spaces. There'll also be delivery bays, loading areas and circulation area, a substation, and the existing building occupied by Thames Valley Construction, which is the applicant, is to be retained. So the proposed buildings will be typically fast food outlet and drive-through in their appearance. This is a street image from Albany Street. And the two industrial buildings will be joined. Bear with me a second. So that's the elevations we've got for the proposed Starbucks, the floor plan, the proposed elevations for the KFC, and the proposed two industrial units. So the proposed materials are render and timber cladding for the A3 and kingspan cladding for the industrial. Proposed access is an all-vehicle access. Sorry, my cursor's a bit slow. There you go. Proposed access is an all-vehicle access at the southern end of the site in the position of an existing access or thereabouts, and a further access off the site to the north, which is currently being developed for Aldi. The applicant tells us that each element has the potential to employ 20 people on a mix of full-time and part-time contracts. This equates to potential for 60 new jobs in total, although this should be treated with some caution, as is a figure that was given prior to the reduction of the scheme from 4 industrial units to 2. So just to clarify on this site layout where those elements are, so the top section, Starbucks, where my cursor is at the moment, just below that, KFC. The retained Thames Valley Construction building is here, bottom left, and the 2 proposed industrial units, bottom right. By way of background, there are several things members should be aware of. Firstly, in January 2023, officers provided pre-application planning advice further to an inquiry for a similar type of proposal on the site. The pre-application response was that officers were unable to support the proposal, notably in relation to the A3 element, and further design, landscape, ecology, highways, retail planning policy and flood risk-related information would be required with any application. Concerns were also expressed to the relationship of industrial units to houses at the turnstiles, which were off the south of the image there. The pre-application advice confirmed, for example, that in the absence of demonstration of need, that's retail need, or if need is established, the absence of of a sequential test that shows no sequentially preferable sites are available or suitable, permission will likely be refused. Also, your proposal is premised on the fact that the proposal is for drive-throughs. However, they are of large scale for such uses and appear to incorporate significant sit-in floor space. And we also said, I am concerned about accessibility and sustainability of the site and the likelihood of car-dominated development in this location. Also concerned about the accessibility of the site by a choice of means of transport and the availability of active travel routes to serve it. And on these matters, the current report is consistent with the advice we gave earlier this year at pre-application stage. Now, in terms of background, we should reference the Aldi site to the north. No doubt you're all aware of it, as the applicants also make frequent reference to it in their support and information, and the scheme relies upon it for access to the north. Members may recall that application reference 220438 was presented to them in February of this year with an officer recommendation to refuse for multiple reasons, including retail need, as the applicant had not demonstrated quantitative need nor robustly demonstrated qualitative need for the proposed out-of-centre store. Retail impact, as the relocation of the proposed Aldi store would result in the loss of an anchor store from the Malpas Road District Centre. Flooding, as the proposal was on a defended floodplain and had not been justified, and the consequences of a flood event were not manageable over the lifetime of the development. Active travel and sustainability, as the proposal was unsustainably located. loss of traditional employment land, as the applicant had not shown that the traditional employment site should be released for alternative use, and archaeological resource, as the applicant had not undertaken an archaeological impact assessment for this riverside location and had not demonstrated that the site can be developed without an acceptable impact upon archaeological resources. Now, many of these issues and concerns are replicated in the current report for this proposal. Now, members of the current committee considered these concerns of officers and determined to grant permission subject to conditions for Aldi. During its debate, members were aware of the permission that had been given for Aldi on the site in 2020 by the previous planning committee, and also placed weight upon reuse of the land and associated regeneration merit to justify a decision contrary to the officer advice at that time. In contrast, this site is currently in use for industry and has no potential fallback consent for uses best located in a city centre or a defined centre. It is not for a supermarket, but rather a mix of A3 food and drink outlets and industry. Finally, in terms of background, the applicant has unilaterally adjusted the site layout during the course of consideration of this application, and whereas the proposal originally included 4 new industrial units, the proposal now includes 2. Okay, site and context. The site is in use, as I've mentioned, as part of the Thames Valley Construction external storage, covering an area of 0.8 of a hectare. The site is level, with a large area of hard standing. To the north is the land under development for Aldi. To the east is the River Usk and the Spitty Pill. To the south is the the Crinder Pill. To the south is the residential estate known as the Turnstiles, and to the west is Albany Street and Sainsbury's. Sorry, I intended to show you when I mentioned the Aldi development, just as a reminder. This slide, it's to jog memories, really. Members saw this earlier this year. This was the Aldi development that was consented on the site north of this one. Okay, and this is an aerial shot of the site we're currently looking at. My cursor is over the current offices for Thames Valley Construction, and you can see the rest of the area is used for that external storage. So the site lies within the urban boundary, and it has no allocation at all in the adopted local development plan. It is within flood zone C1, which is defended floodplain of the development advice maps, but for current best available data on flood risk, officers also refer to the flood maps for planning, which shows the site is affected by flood zone 3 for sea and flood zone 2 for rivers. NRW have recently completed flood defence works on the site perimeter to provide a sheet-piled flood wall along Crinder Pill. The Pill forms part of the River Usk site of special scientific interest and special area of conservation, and has significant nature conservation interest. The site is in Parking Zone 5, and current access to the site, as I said, is from Albany Street. So the key issues, we've set these out in the officer report, but they include, for example, retail need, both quantitative and qualitative, sequential test, flooding, impact on amenity, biodiversity, parking access and circulation, regeneration benefit in terms of employment and loss of industrial land, and archaeology. So of these, several are considered by officers to be fundamental to this particular assessment. So firstly, the need for a use best located in a centre, both quantitative and qualitative. National planning policy, supported by policies in the adopted local development plan, tell us that, I quote, retail and commercial centres such as the city centre and our district centres are hubs of social and economic activity and the focal point for a diverse range of services which support the needs of local communities. They are highly accessible to different modes of transport and are the most sustainable locations for new development. A3 uses are to be regarded as a complementary use to a retail and commercial centre. The Welsh Government operates a town centres first policy in relation to the location of new retail and commercial centre development. Quantitative and qualitative need in this case is not robustly shown. Qualitative tests are set out in national planning policy, and these may weigh in an application's favour and are referred to in paragraph 7.10 of your reports with analysis thereafter. However, officers can confirm the proposal does not support the objectives and retail strategy of an adopted development plan. It is not highly accessible by walking, cycling or public transport. It will not contribute to a substantial reduction in car journeys. It does not contribute to the co-location of facilities in existing retail and commercial centres, as there is no defined centre in this location or adjoining. It will not significantly contribute to the vibrancy, attractiveness and viability of a commercial centre. It will not assist in the alleviation of overtrading or traffic congestion surrounding existing local comparable stores. It does not address locally defined deficiencies in provision in terms of quality and quantity, including that which would serve new residential developments, as well as the applicant points to demand evidenced by the fact that 2 operators are named in the application. This does not itself demonstrate a deficiency of supply. In any case, merely naming an operator as evidence of need in an application is an argument that could be put forward anywhere on any site. It does not alleviate a lack of convenience goods provision in a disadvantaged area. So a significant element of the applicant's case appears to be premised on the locational needs of a drive-through. In the same way as operators being named does not itself demonstrate need for the units, advancing a case that if a unit has a drive-through, it must go in locations such as this are arguments that must be treated with caution. They are arguments that can be repeated anywhere, with significant implications for areas of Newport that are defined centres and the retail and commercial hubs that national planning policy advocates. The floor plans for both KFC and Starbucks show the largest area of floor space given over to seating area. That said, it would be foolish to deny the attraction of drive-throughs and their importance to the business models of both these operators that rely on such trade, as people want fast food faster and possibly by way of advanced online ordering and collection. Whichever way we look at it, these operators have the potential to attract sit-in trade and significant traffic in their own right, and therefore sustainable urban locations and or defined centres are best placed to accommodate them. The site is considered to be neither of these things. The sequential test is a requirement for the committee to consider this test falls away if need has not been proven. However, officers have set out their assessment of the applicant's sequential test for robustness' sake. It is for the applicant to robustly show that no more appropriate site is available or suitable as part of this test, and officers have set out their reasoning for why this has not been shown in the officer report. However, this point, as I say, is academic, as need has not been established for the A3 commercial units, and thus this must weigh heavily against this scheme, as it fails to satisfy both national and local policy in this regard and is contrary to policies SP19 and R8 of the Local Development Plan. Moving on to flooding, the second fundamental issue in officer view. So the site is within a defended floodplain, but would flood beyond tolerable levels within the lifetime of the scheme. NRW objects to the proposal and advised that the application fails to demonstrate that the risks and consequences of flooding can be managed to an acceptable level. Officers conclude that the development is not justified in accordance with TAN 15 and fails the primary and fundamental tests, with the proposal being within the floodplain and contrary to local policy. This must also weigh very heavily against the scheme. Third fundamental point, biodiversity and appropriate assessment. Now, there are unlikely to be any significant impacts upon protected species or habitats within the red line boundary of this proposal. However, the information submitted with the application does not consider the need for a habitats regulations assessment, nor does it provide the Council with sufficient information to undertake a habitats regulation assessment. Some of the potential effects on the site of special scientific interest and the special area of conservation could likely be mitigated. However, otters are a European protected species, and the Council would need confirmation from NRW that they would be likely to grant a licence for works which may affect this species, taking into account any mitigation the applicants may propose. NRW has raised concerns in relation to light spill and landscape proposal fulfilment in its response. This corresponds with queries raised by the NCC Landscape Officer and the NCC Ecology Officer, and further clarity is required regarding landscape and boundary treatment works. In short, the updated landscape plan, which you can see on the screen now, does not include the quality of information or the required confidence that a satisfactory approach can be achieved in this regard, although is better than the first iteration of the layout plan received with this submission. At present, it is clear that the Council does not have sufficient information to complete a habitats regulation assessment, but it is required to do so prior to any grant of planning permission. This shortcoming must weigh heavily against the scheme and be a reason to refuse it. The agent has suggested that similar concerns were raised in relation to the Aldi proposal, and a habitats regulation assessment was undertaken by officers and subsequently agreed by NRW. However, in the case of the Aldi scheme, more information was available, notably in relation to treatment of the riverside and sectional details that offered greater confidence on matters particularly relating to the impact of development on protected otters. The NCC ecologist is aware of the habitats regulation assessment undertaken on the adjoining site, has considered it, and his updated comments account for it, but retain an objection as set out at section 5.2 of your reports, as we do not have sufficient information to complete a habitats regulation assessment in this case. In relation to other material considerations, officers have assessed impact on amenity. So on this point, no objection is raised in relation to the design of the proposed buildings. Let me just show you those again. So there you go. Typical drive-through stroke A3 unit. And like I say, no objection in principle to design. Concerns are, however, raised in relation to the layout generally, and green infrastructure or landscape quality as part of the proposal, and the subsequent impact of development on the street scene and the riverside. Now, while some aspect of the landscape concerns set out in the landscape officer comments could potentially be addressed, officers currently have insufficient confidence on the feasibility of acceptable landscape delivery in the current layout, and associated amenity and ecology effects that I've already mentioned associated with this, and therefore do not recommend planning conditions that could address it. In relation to operational and construction noise and effects on nearby residential receptors, if minded to approve permission, officers consider this can be protected by a suitable construction environmental management plan and operational hours and use restrictions, for example. The A3 units are single-storey. They're separated from the nearest residential receptors by existing industrial activity, and notwithstanding any associated traffic implications off-site, are considered unlikely to give rise to harm to amenity per se. Officers did initially raise concerns for the impact of the impact of the industrial units on the amenity of 4 houses that back onto the intervening boundary to the south of the site. However, since this time, the applicant has changed their plans and now proposes a smaller industrial building of just under 7 metres high. So let's take a better look at this a second. So this is a 3D aerial image. The 2 industrial units will go roughly where my cursor is. 2 units at the turnstiles would be affected. They would have direct sight of the 2 industrial units, but you can see there's intervening trees, which appear to be on the neighbour's side. Here's another view of that. So where the tree is, that's where the 2 industrial units are proposed. And again, another view showing the wider site taken from the north. And again, from the Crinderpill vantage point. Okay, as I say, the 2 industrial units roughly where my cursor is, sorry. The 2 industrial units are located just off the boundary. They do extend across the rear of 2 houses and will be located to the north of the houses and the gardens. Impact on sunlight and associated overshadowing will therefore be limited. That said, the introduction of industrial units alongside the boundary has the potential to be unneighbourly. And in this regard, officers note that no openings are proposed in the rear of the industrial units. The site is already in industrial use, and existing trees within the residential gardens currently appear to present notable features affecting the rear garden areas of the affected dwellings. So officers consider on balance that impact upon amenity is not reason to withhold planning permission. These are photographs taken from the ground, just to close up that point. That is taken from the turnstiles and shows the existing offices of Thames Valley Construction, which will be retained. This is a view taken from the end turning head. So the proposed industrial units are a little further along this boundary. But again, it's just to show you a little more context. So back on the layout plan and thinking now about parking, access and circulation issues. Parking levels are now broadly adequate, further to changes made to the original plan. However, the Highways officer has maintained their objection. And like, for example, the Aldi scheme next door, where initial highway concerns were overcome, subject to suitable conditions on any consent. So in this case, objections are made and maintained on grounds of servicing, parking, not levels of parking, inclusion and sustainable travel policies, particularly those relating to the safety of vulnerable highways and site users. Full details of the Highways officer comments are contained in the officer report, and these objections cannot be comprehensively addressed by way of planning conditions. Highways clearly do not consider the site has appropriate and safe servicing provision, and the layout does in this respect pose a risk to site users and impacts upon the use of parking spaces and general site accessibility and permeability. Just a couple of things to point out because they are mentioned in the Highways officer comments. So loading bays to serve the A3 are in the internal highway. You can see them hatched, hopefully, these rectangular areas here and here. So they're on the internal highway, blocking spaces, particularly in this area here and here, when they would be occupied by delivery vehicles. That northern section of the site is dominated by internal highway infrastructure and parking and the like. The layout is also reliant, we've mentioned this already, upon third-party land in the form of the Aldi site for one of the two access points that are necessary for this layout to work in practice, and that's that access at the north of the plan. The applicant appears to suggest that the northern access will actually be the primary route in for the A3 units. However, we currently have no certainty over any rights of access at this point, and if there are rights, whether they include any restrictions that may affect vehicle size, for example, delivery vehicle size. So the site layout shows loading bays, as I've said, for HGVs on the internal roads, blocking spaces and generally impacting pedestrian and vehicular movements within the site. Officers consider that the proposal, notably in relation to the A3 units, is overdeveloped and results in a highly complex arrangement of loading, access, general servicing and parking. Furthermore, officers note that the transport appraisal submitted with the application concludes traffic generated by the proposal to be insignificant, and it is assumed that as this site is not located directly on or overly visible from the primary highway network, the outlets, that's the A3 outlets, will primarily trade off Sainsbury's and Aldi traffic, as well as some local traffic. This statement in the transport appraisal is inconsistent with other arguments made by the applicant in their supporting information that refers to the drive-throughs attracting motorists using the M4 and the A4042, which I refer to as the Cumbrae bypass, or Heidenheim. It cannot be argued as it is that the proposals will primarily attract dual trips to offset trip generation tables to satisfy highway expectations, and then argue that a need arises as the brands are not represented along the M4 or the A4042 for retail planning policy purposes. Officers acknowledge that some of the visits to the A3 units will invariably be in combination with adjacent supermarkets, and the units will inevitably draw customers who are not visiting the supermarkets and so will have a draw all of their own. This seems unlikely to arise from passing trade on the M4 though, or indeed the A4042, as the scheme will not be readily visible from either. So it is more likely trips will occur from the local area and further afield to specifically collect products by these brands. In short, there are inconsistencies amongst the supporting documentation, and the arguments used to favour the proposal are often conflicting. However, no issues are raised by the highways officer in relation to junction and highway capacity based on the transport information supplied. The site is not considered highly sustainable, and the cumulative impact of this and other retail and similar activities best located in centres and the concerns relating to on-site layouts set out by the highways officer all have the potential to significantly increase private vehicle traffic alongside HGV and commercial industrial traffic manoeuvres mixed with cyclists and pedestrians using the current shared active travel routes, making these even less welcoming and attractive to these users, and generally giving rise to increased risk and highway safety concerns. Bus stops to encourage access by public transport, bear with me, do not exist in the vicinity. So this aerial shot is to show you the location of the site in relation to the nearest bus stops, which are remote from it. And in the absence of information to demonstrate otherwise, and having regard to the highway officer objection, officers have significant concerns with regards to the proposals, in particular from a highway safety and sustainability perspective, and consider them unacceptable in this regard. Archaeological interest is mentioned in reports. Glamorgan Gwent Archaeological Trust have objected, since they consider the site has archaeological potential that has not been assessed under the submission. A desktop archaeological assessment is required prior to determination, and potentially further work depending on the results of that assessment. Finally, the site is still in active employment use. It is not redundant, and national policy would seek its retention as a B use class. Local policy EM3 seeks to protect employment sites in general, with the explanatory text emphasising the particular need to protect land in the B use classes. Okay, so that's light industrial, general industrial, storage and distribution. That policy, criteria 1, requires 12 months of active marketing for industrial uses, for example. The applicant notes this requirement, they're aware of it, but has done no marketing, and states that the merits of the proposal outweigh this criteria. Support and information provided by the applicant from Knight Frank states, I quote, "The industrial sector has proved resilient through the recent economic turbulence. Development of smaller workshop and business units of up to 2,000 square feet has been an area where we have witnessed significant growth and demand. The main source of demand for this product is local companies that want to own their own property, and sustained demand is driving up capital values. In our opinion, development of 2 units within an estate in close proximity to the M4 at Newport would be very well received by business occupiers." Now, whilst the applicant has argued that the city has a healthy supply of employment land, it is nevertheless important to retain land in the areas most likely to prove attractive to investors in this sector. The point of the marketing exercise is to test demand in this location, on this site, and for traditional employment uses, as I say, whether this be light industry, general industrial, or storage and distribution. If no need is shown following a robust marketing exercise, then this outcome will be considered for the purposes of evaluation of alternative use proposals against that policy EM3 in the local development plan. In this case, officers conclude that it has not been robustly shown the site in its entirety can be safely lost to traditional employment uses, and the applicant also tells us that there is likely demand for B1 industrial units of this type proposed in this particular area. So to conclude, any benefits of the scheme are clearly outweighed by the identified harms, and on balance the proposal should be refused for the reasons set out in the officer report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Joanne. We now go on to public speakers. I do see there's 2 of you there. I only have 1 name down. And yourself, yeah. But, so, first of all, I have John Hurley. I'm not going to say you can't speak, but first of all, I have Mr. Hurley, please. And you are, well, Mr. Hurley then first, please. 5 minutes, okay?
Thank you, Chair, members. As we've heard, the application proposes 2 speculative employment units and 2 drive-through restaurants within the storage yard of Gwent Engineering and Thames Valley Construction. As we've heard, the offices which they currently use to run their business will be retained. Gwent Civil Engineering and Thames Valley Construction are family-owned companies which have been based at the current premises on Albany Street in Newport for well over 10 years. In terms of the 2 flexible employment units we've heard, these will provide new modern purpose-built space which we understand and we've heard from Knight Frank, the employment agents we are working with, are very much in high demand in the South Wales market due to a lack of this type of floor space. 2 new drive-throughs are also proposed, and these will be built for Starbucks and KFC. The Starbucks drive-through will be run by Magic Bean, which is a Welsh-based franchisee which currently has 18 other drive-throughs in South Wales. We consider that there are some significant benefits which will be delivered through the scheme. We've just heard how the new employment space will be built and can cater for local businesses to occupy and expand from, and this is very much in demand. Attracting national brand to the area and providing a range of high-quality employment opportunities. As a letter that has been circulated from Magic Bean confirms, the Starbucks will create 20 jobs for local people, and this is in addition to those provided by KFC and the employment units. Also, we consider the regeneration of a key brownfield site that completes the street frontage upgrade of Albany Street from the turnstiles to the link road is an important consideration. The scheme will also complement the Sainsbury's and the new Aldi store that's just been granted planning permission, which, as we've seen from the images, is directly to the north of the site, and which was granted planning permission by the council earlier this year. This will result, we believe, in the benefits from co-locating employment and retail uses alongside each other, which will result in sustainable link trips. And finally, we also consider that providing the scheme will provide a social and civic amenity for the local community and beyond, with the development being right next to Route 88 of the national cycle network between Newport and Caerleon, which does assist the site's sustainability. As we've heard, despite these benefits to the local economy, the application is recommended for refusal. These, for example, include flood risk, and this is despite £13 million having recently been spent by NRW on the upgrade of defences, retail need and highways, for instance. These were all points that we considered to be addressed via detailed submissions we made in relation to the application, such as supplying planning retail appeal decisions, which recognise that drive-through restaurants such as this are a format which can be located outside of defined local shopping centres. The position taken, as we've heard this morning, by officers on these issues is comparable with the approach that they took on the Aldi proposals earlier this year. However, from watching the Planning Committee earlier this year, the Aldi scheme was approved at the Planning Committee as it was recognised that there were significant economic and employment benefits that will be delivered. We consider, for instance, a position with regards to flood risk that are the same with our scheme, in that the uses proposed are again less vulnerable than, for instance, residential housing, and actually are as per the current uses on the site, and that the defences in this area of Newport will further be improved in the future. The lifetime of development in planning terms is required to be 75 years. However, in accordance with the tests in TAM 15, for the next 55 years the scheme is flood-free. There has to be some logic to suggest that NRW, the Council and the Welsh Government will in future years improve flood defences for this part of Newport. If a consistent approach is taken to this application, like the Aldi scheme, where it was recognised at Planning Committee that this area now operates as a shopping location, the application should be granted. The positive material considerations we have outlined should allow on balance the application to be approved. A range of new jobs will be created for local people alongside the regeneration of a key brownfield site, which will complement the new Aldi store in due time. In addition, new employment opportunities will be provided through the employment units, and this will go some way to meeting the pressing market requirement for these. Thank you for your time, and we would respectfully request that the application is approved. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lawrence, would you like to speak? 5 minutes, yeah.
Thank you. I live in one of the turnstiles. I've been living there since 1999, and one of the turnstiles is straight off the Albany Street. Recently, we've been having problems with speeders going across the street, which was exacerbated by initially by the Sainsbury's supermarket, which had been sorted. And I feel that if KFC and Starbucks come into the area, that will give them another speeders or car racers to use the street as a racetrack, going on the A442 down past Sainsbury's, back across Albany Street, and then using it as Brands Hatch rather than a 20-mile-per-hour zone. The problem with Sainsbury's has been rectified very kindly by Sainsbury's themselves. If there was only one avenue for the cars to go into KFC and Starbucks, the residents on the turnstiles would be more than happy, because that will stop the cars using our road as a track, because it's long straight. Police and council officials say that being as we've got 2 chicanes and 2 notices, speed notices, on the street, that is more than enough to prevent the cars from speeding. this is not the case, because the speed notices have not got any cameras attached to them. So quite often I see cars speeding down there at 40, 50 plus miles per hour regularly. And if a speeder wants to go down there, it's a case of they're not going to stop unless somebody come through if they stop at a chicane. And I feel that with the drive-through of KFC and Starbucks, that would make the matters worse, which would put people's lives at risk, animals' lives at risk. At the moment, we've had no, I believe it's called KPIs down on Albany Street, but I believe that's only a matter of time before that will happen and somebody will get seriously hurt with the volume of traffic which will become as a result of KFC and Starbucks coming and the customers using the Albany Street rather than the A442. It's a case of if the KFC is going to be a 24-hour KFC, again, that will disturb people's sleep who live on turnstiles and work in the daytime. And as the picture showed from the trees which affect in the turnstiles, that will be another area which the residents who that will be affecting will not be very happy about it, because I know a lot of residents were not happy about the Aldi store coming. I only found out about the KFC store due to the fact that a neighbour of mine told me about it because I wasn't given a notice of it, because I live just outside the area of the 50-metre radius. So it's a case of I would like it refused for the pure fact of the level of traffic, and things will only get worse with the traffic down in the area.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a ward member who would like to speak. Councillor Cockerman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair and Planning Committee. Obviously, one of the first things I'd like to mention is about delegated decisions, and why I raise this, because in this chamber, going back at least 15, 20 years ago, we had a presentation in here about delegated decisions. And I find that at the time when we had this presentation, delegated decisions was about porches, it was about small extensions, and I think this is a typical application here that should be done by members as opposed to officers. There's too much involvement, and I think you can see by the presentation that really that decision should be taken by members rather than officers. So I want to make that point right at the beginning. When I asked for it to come to the committee, I was quite surprised that I had to put up reasons why that the application should go to the full planning committee. I was said, as per protocol, and I said, well, what's this protocol? And so it annoys me. I know I'm digressing, and I accept that, but I'm so annoyed about what's happening.
Okay.
Right,
Councillor, you've been in my position, and you know what it's like.
Yeah, and you...
So could you get on to your
All right,
points,
get on to that, and I'll take that up somewhere else, because I'm not happy about it, the way some members are being treated. When we looked about the application, I, for one, wants that area improved, okay? When we look at that site down there, if anybody has gone down, officers or members of the planning committee have ever gone down the Alderney Street and looked behind there, all the buildings that are out there at the moment, that are appalling. All along Albert Street, we talk about it as an industrial area, but some of the industrial units down there are appalling. And I think this application is going to somewhat improve it. And that's why I'm supporting that application, and that's why I want to speak on it. Now, if we look at Alderney Street, which comes right from the back there, some of those buildings, and you've got scrap cars there just full of junk. Now, I know people talk about the speeding and what's going down Albany Street, but I'm amazed that anyone wants to go down Albany Street. We are addressing that as council. I spoke to Highways, and they are looking at different speed issues down there and what we can do about that. But I don't think many people are going to come down there. I think they come down from the roundabout at Sainsbury's. What concerns me a little bit, to be perfectly honest, is about the flooding, because I think we got to be. I think we've got to look at what flooding, what we're seeing along that riverfront. As has been mentioned, the NRW put £13 million of flood prevention along that site, and obviously that was part of the reason of Aldi's going there, really, because obviously it did protect that area. But if we're consistent, and I think this is where I worry about it, in the local development plan that we've got, in the old Sainsbury's site, we've got 140 houses there that we're recommending, and that could be for housing. Well, if it's going to be a flood risk in that area, it's going to be a flood risk in the old Sainsbury's site as well. So, you know, we can't play ducks and drakes here. You know, we've got to be consistent, and that's why I think there's a lot of inconsistency. Now, whether it's Starbucks or whether it's KFC is going to go there, I don't know, because obviously I think that what the officer said, it's a potential there, and I understand that. But the area I want that area to be maintained at a good standard. I think going back quite a few years ago, Shaftesbury was, and I'm sure John Reynolds, although he's not speaking at the moment, it was the 4th most deprived area in Wales. Now, obviously, we're not in that level at the moment, and all I'm saying is I want that area to be developed. You know, Sainsbury's down there has made quite a difference to it. Aldi's will make a difference in it. That area is a poor area for industrial. We talk about industrial units there. They're a mess down there. They're not good buildings down there. All along there, I'm asking this committee to approve the application rather than just leave it like it is, because I think it's a desert land down there at the moment. So I'm not going to say any more about it, because obviously the planning officer have made quite a long presentation of what all the adjustments, but I'm just saying I think the future of that area needs to be regenerated. Whether it's this or whether it's another application, I don't want it to be left like in the state it is now at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Cockman. We open the floor to questions. Councillor Howells.
Thanks, Chair. Joanne, if I can address you via the Chair. Your presentation talked, I felt there was an undertone to it, which I took, so I'm going to get some clarification on that. And I think you sort of mentioned that the applicant had unilaterally changed the 2 commercial units, for example, and that sort of language led me to believe that the applicant hasn't really played ball with the planners in this case, and has sort of attempted to ride sort of roughshod over what they want to see and not really take into account the planners' sort of recommendation. You also referred to a pre-application which didn't result in sort of the changes that perhaps the planners would have liked to have seen to be able to move forward. You also talked about the natural habitat, if that's a right term. I sure you understand what I'm referring to, and the fact that the applicant hasn't sort of provided sufficient detail in order for that assessment to be made. So my question on that is am I right that the sort of applicant hasn't played ball and done the things that we've requested to try and work up a scheme in collaboration, if you like, which is the sort of intent of the pre-application? And my question is, have we got to a scheme that we could have accepted had there been that collaboration? A couple of other points separate to that then. It seems to me that the development is different to Aldi's completely, in my view. And there seems to me to be a sense that the applicant thinks, well, Aldi's passed, so the committee passed that, so we'll stick it in front of the committee, ignore what the planning officers are saying, and the committee will just approve it because they approved Aldi's. That's the impression I'm getting from the things that have been written and said. The scheme is dense. It's got too much on, in my view, particularly the deliveries area. I mean, to have to have crammed in deliveries onto the main road coming in, nowhere near one of the sort of A3 consents, seems to me to be just trying to cram too much onto this as a money-making scheme rather than a scheme that proper fits the regeneration of the site. I accept Councillor Cockram's point. I think the site is a poor visual amenity and does affect the air, and I'd like to see some regeneration, but it seems to me that there's been an attempt to maximise the profit here and not work with the planners to see the proper regeneration of the scheme. So hopefully there's some questions in there you can get back to me on. Thanks, Chair.
Joe, can you comprehensive questions again, by Mr.
Okay, I'll do my best. As you know, we do encourage pre-application discussions. And the applicant did submit a pre-application, or we have had a pre-application inquiry on this site. We raised at pre-application stage earlier this year many of the issues that we are talking about now. So they're not new. In fact, they're consistent with officers' consideration of the main constraints and issues on the Aldi scheme. Also, 2 reports on Aldi in the public domain. So nothing that we're discussing should be news in terms of from the applicant's perspective. They know what the issues are. They know what they needed to do to address it in terms of the support and information. Now, the application itself is supported by information. So things like flood consequence assessment, that's all there. But it's got its shortcomings that NRW has identified. They've tried to argue, for example, a 55-year lifetime of development, which falls short of the guideline 75-year lifetime in TAN 15, because over a 55-year lifetime of development, the site will be flood-free. I don't blame them for doing it, but over a 75-year lifetime of development, it will flood. When I referenced the unilateral changing of the plans, that was because we knew from the outset we had some fundamental objections with this, and that's why I tried to order my presentation with those 3 big hitters right at the start. That is retail, need, the need assessment, the flooding issue, and the biodiversity issue. Like I say, none of those are new issues. Those were the initial fundamental points. We covered it in our pre-app, and they remain the key fundamental points from my perspective. We've got, obviously, support and information. I think the agent referred to it regarding Knight Frank and the company that's going to run the franchise on Starbucks, all giving us all the merits that we know about employment, 20 per unit, full and part-time. Obviously, that's good news. Not so sure about the employment potential of the 2 units now that they've been adjusted from 4 to 2. But that unilateral change, I'm not quite sure why it came about, but I think most likely it came about from the initial consultation response of the landscape officer, which would have been put on the file. And I think in order to get additional landscaping on the site, they knew that with the 4 unit, it was maxed out. So they reduced it to 2. They've shown some more landscaping, but you'll see from the landscape officer's second response and the ecology officer's second response that it doesn't address or fully address their concerns. The landscape officer acknowledges it's better, so there's a step forward, but we're still concerned and lack confidence about delivery on the riverside and the Albany Street side in terms of landscaping, because there's very tight margins left on site for the delivery of a robust landscaping scheme. Sectional details along the riverside, for example. We had all that with the Aldi site. And the applicant does, not unsurprisingly, make a lot of reference to the Aldi scheme in their submission. And again, I don't blame them for doing that either. So I'm not sure how we could honestly get past those fundamental objections. In my presentation, where I thought that we could make some progress and mitigate some elements, I tried to tell you that. But there are some very fundamental points that I'm not convinced we can get over. And so I wouldn't go as far as to say that the applicant has been uncooperative in any way. It's just when we have a scheme before us where we have such significant fundamental objections, we're often not inclined to seek changes because we're just putting them to additional expense unnecessarily. Hopefully that answers that, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Mogford.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to commend the councillor for his passionate speech, but at the beginning, I think the process that we have with planning is very robust, and the opportunity for the councillor to call it in is something that works well. It is open to slight abuse, but in this case it's worked very well. So moving forward, I think that flooding is not an exact science. We hear about the projections for the future. Only yesterday we had some bad rain, and you know, where did that come from? You know, and all the issues that were associated with it. It's difficult to look ahead at the flooding issues. I noticed the turnstiles. It was a residential development. My question then is, when was that there, and why is that there if the flooding risk is so high? You know, it's a different situation for residential properties to industrial properties. You know, you live in your house 24/7. So it's difficult to take on balance the risk of flooding, especially when defences have been put in. Yeah, it's a difficult one on the flooding side. You know, where will we be in 55 years? Where will we be tomorrow? Thank you.
I'm not sure I can answer that final question.
That was the half a question is we need to be consistent, I think. There's residential properties there that I noticed. Yet we're concerned about flood risks for, shall we say, industrial properties. Could you help me understand how we can be more consistent?
I can try. I mean, the first point I was going to make is obviously a few people have mentioned that NRW have spent a significant amount of money of late putting in the Crinderpill flood defence works. Now, those defence works, as you'll see in NRW's response, are to protect existing development, i.e. the turnstiles and the like. You're right, residential development is highly vulnerable. I don't know what the age of the turnstiles is, but I'd say it's at least 25 years old. So, you know, I can't tell you what the considerations in terms of flooding were then. What I can tell you is they would have been different to what they are now. But NRW make this point, and they make it regularly. Those defence works and that spending that they've made on doing it are to protect existing development. They are not there to open the door for new development. So this is why NRW has objected. They've objected quite strongly. I mean, this particular site, because of its location, if there's an overtopping event, it will happen within 10 minutes. Okay, so the site will flood within 10 minutes. And over a 75-year lifetime of development, we're looking at, based on information in the modelling, over 1.5 metres high. Well beyond the tolerable limits. I mean, it should be flood-free. The agent has confirmed it would be over 55-year lifetime, but it's the 75-year lifetime that we prefer to work to in accordance with the guidance before us. So each case on its merits. I've heard that many times. I'm not sure whether that answers it or not.
Just to pick up on your it'll flood in 10 minutes, I mean, that's a little bit emotive. I think we would have a lot of notice that flooding would occur. It wouldn't be that suddenly you've got 10 minutes to get out of here. You know.
I think it's something that's mentioned somewhere in the NRW comments. I'm not sure. It is mentioned somewhere in the report. But I think the point is, if it gets to that point, the site is being where it is. There's no warning of incoming flood water. I appreciate that if there is a tidal flooding issue, they'll normally get some advance warning, but should they not heed those warnings, that site, rather than it running up the levels, for example, would flood immediately during such an event, or within the first 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Are there any members of the committee which are online like to ask a question? No? Councillor Jordan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I totally agree with what Councillor Cochran said. I mean, it is a very deprived area around there at the moment. I mean, it needs some like redevelopment. You know, just recently, I think that the British Rail have had the offices just round by Glasgow Cottages. That's all been closed down now as well. There's nothing really there at all. So there's a lot of unused land around that area. The other thing as well, I noticed when they said about the accessible, sustainable travel. You know, there's got the pathway from along the side of the river, like the cycle route and everything else. You know, that's something to open up to people. I mean, you know, if they've got something like this along the side of the road, I mean, people will stop and have a little bit of a break or something like that. But you know, really, to me, it's well worth something to look at. I mean, to improve the area with. I mean, you know, even though it's not from Albany Street, you know, coming down, it's from the Hinderheim Drive. You know, many people use that direction down there to use that site as well. But you know, I am all for actually, you know, allowing it. But if there's some tweaks to it, maybe, you know, even down to one unit instead of the two, to make it more accessible, easier to manage, loading, unloading. I think it'd be at least something, you know, which is improve the area.
Thank you. I take that as a... Do you want to come back? Sorry. I take that as a comment rather than a question. Yeah. Councillor Ewells.
Thanks, Chair. On the sort of flood point, I kind of concede, to be honest with you, that, you know, to get some development and regeneration in there, whichever you put in there, this is probably of the least vulnerable of the types of development. So on a 55-year basis, I kind of can concede that may be sufficient in terms of outweighing the economic and regeneration benefits outweigh the sort of flood risk, and you might take a more lenient view on the 55-year rather than 75-year life cycle of development. But for me, you know, the Knight Frank report then suggests that there's lots of expansion in sort of B-class development. So this scheme could easily be developed for 6 or 7, perhaps B-class developments rather than the A3, I think, developments that the sort of KFC and the Starbucks would be. So, and because of the denseness of trying to cram those 2 A3 units on there, I think it's unsustainable. And on that basis, I would support the officer's recommendations for the scheme.
Okay, thank you. I take that as comments again, not questions. Okay, thank you. So the recommendation is to be refused. Could I have a support of that, please? A seconder? Okay, Councillor Modford, thank you. So the recommendation is refusal. Could all those in favour of the refusal please raise their hands? Okay. So 1, 2. Councillor Perkins, was your hand up or down? Okay. So that's I think that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for, and those against, and 2 against. Okay, so the recommendation has been passed. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for attending and for your time today. Sorry. Okay, if we can move on to item number 3, which is application 23/0858, and this will be presented by Grant Hawkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. Here we go then. So this application is for the provision of an underground electricity transmission circuit. The application seeks planning permission for the laying of approximately 1.5 kilometres of underground cable at Dufferin Lane and Celtic Way in the Coed Kearney ward. The new circuit is required to provide an increase in the electricity supply to the applicant's CW11 data centre, which is the former LG Electronics building, and has been used as a data centre since the first phase was brought into operation in 2011, following approval in 2008. Subsequent phases of the development have entered into operation over the last decade, and as the new data halls open, there is an associated increase in demand for power. The existing electricity connections from the National Grid Imperial Park substation will reach capacity. The proposed development is required to enable the full operation of the approved data centre. So the proposed laying of the cable would be permitted development if it were to be carried out by the statutory undertaker. However, in this instance, it is the applicant carrying out the works, so it requires planning permission. The application is before the planning committee as the site area is greater than 1 hectare in size and therefore constitutes major development. So the CW11 data centre is outlined in red on the screen there. It's the first unit you see on the left-hand side as you enter Celtic Way from the A48 and is entered by here. The route of the proposed cabling will start at the existing substation to the south, highlighted, I think, by my cursor. Yeah. And it will travel north along Dufferin Lane. At the point of intersection with Celtic Way, just to the south of the roundabout there, it will enter the public highway, go around the roundabout, continue north along Celtic Way, to the entrance of the CW11 data centre, around the car park, over to the eastern elevation of the building, whereby it will there enter the building. The applicant has confirmed that the works along the route will be undertaken in 30-metre sections. A working area width of 6 metres is required, and a 1.5 metre deep by 1.8 metre wide trench will be dug. The cables will be laid and then the trench back filled, prior to moving on to the next section. The works are anticipated to take approximately 4 months to complete. There's a section drawing there, as you will see on the screen, which shows that just over 1.5 by almost 1.8 metre wide trench that will be dug. The cables laid, stock boards laid over top with protective marking, so anyone digging in the future will be aware what lays underneath. Backfilled by native soil, and then the surface will be returned to its existing state. So the key considerations of the application, as set out in the officer's report, are considered to be highway safety, environmental and ecological impact, trees and landscaping, residential amenity, archaeology and conservation, and flood risk. So if we start with highway safety, as previously referred to, the works will take place in 30-metre sections along the highway to minimise disruption as much as possible. So on the top left-hand photo, this is taken at the intersection of Dufferin Lane and Celtic Way. So it's gated off, it's closed off, and we're looking in a southern direction towards the substation in the top left-hand corner. The route will then enter onto Celtic Way at the roundabout. It will continue around the roundabout. Bottom left-hand photo is travelling up Celtic Way in a northerly direction. The next photo continuing on. And then the final photo shows the point at which it will access the application site, the CW11 data centre. So the Council's Highways Officer has confirmed that the development will be managed by a site-wide construction environment management plan, and there's no concerns in relation to that. However, they have confirmed that the works in the public highway, so the works on Celtic Way, will require a separate licence and traffic management measures from the Council's Street Works Department, and they will need to be applied for through a separate process to arrange approval of these. However, we are overall satisfied that the development will comply with policy GP4, highway safety and accessibility. Moving on to the environmental and ecological impact. An ecological impact assessment has been submitted by the applicant due to the proximity of the site to the Gwent Levels St Bride's SSSI, which is noted for its range of aquatic plants and invertebrates associated with reens and ditches of the drainage system. So the grid in green that you can see there on the plan is the SSSI, and as you can see, a small portion of the application site enters into that SSSI. So there is a potential hydrological connectivity with the Gwent Levels, SSSI, and Natural Resources Wales have been consulted. NRW requested some minor amendments to the KEMP, however are now happy with the revised submission, and providing it is followed, have confirmed that the development is unlikely to result in any adverse impact on the nearby designations. NRW have advised that as the competent authority under the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations 2017, it is for the local authority to carry out the test of likely significant effects for the proposed development. Should the local planning authority conclude that the proposed development is likely to have a significant effect on any designation, either alone or in combination with any other plans or projects within the area, an appropriate assessment must be made of the implications of the project for that site in view of its conservation objectives. So you would have seen attached to the officer's report is Appendix A, and that includes details of the extant projects that have been considered, so those projects which have not been built yet but have permission or are currently before the Council for consideration, in relation to the River Usk and the Severn Estuary. So following assessment of their potentials for in-combination effects, it has been considered that the proposed development, along with those others, would have no combined likely significant effect, and an appropriate assessment is not required in this instance. The Council's ecologist has provided comments in relation to the proposed precautionary methods of working, and the committee would have received a late representations report yesterday in relation to this. It was initially proposed within the conditional regime that the PMW would need to be submitted for approval prior to the commencement of development. However, this has now been submitted by the applicant to be agreed up front. The precautionary methods of work relate to ensuring that the proposed development does not result in any adverse impact on protected species. This approach assumes that there will be species present within the vicinity of the site, and therefore sets out mitigation and measures to ensure that they are protected. The Council's ecologist has now reviewed this document and confirmed its acceptability. It is now proposed, as set out within the late representations report, to control the PMW through a directive condition as opposed to a submission for information prior to commencement of development. The Council's contamination officer is satisfied there is no likely contamination as a result of the scheme and has offered no objections subject to conditions. So overall, we're satisfied that the development complies with policies SP4, SP9, GP5 and GP7. Moving on to trees and landscaping, the Council's tree officer is satisfied with the arboricultural information submitted and that development will not result in any adverse impact on surrounding landscape features. Condition 3 and 4 requires tree protection fencing to be installed and works to be carried out in accordance with the approved arboricultural method statement. So I've just included a section there of the tree protection plan which outlines the site in red. The purple line is the extent of the trench, and then for this example, these two areas here are trees, and the orange line is the extent of the protecting fencing, which we put in place to protect those landscape features during the digging of the trench. So this is worth noting, this is predominantly impacted on the Dyffryn Lane element of the scheme as opposed to Celtic Way. The Council's landscape officer is satisfied that there will be no landscape impact due to the underground nature of the works and the making good of the land on completion. Moving on to residential amenity, as you can see from the Google Earth aerial image here, the site is located significantly away from the nearest residential properties and given its nature will not result in any impact on these upon completion. The Environmental Health Officer is satisfied that the CEMP controls any impact during construction to an acceptable level. So we're satisfied that development complies with policy GP2 and GP7. Archaeology and conservation. So the Council's Historic Buildings Conservation Officer has been consulted given the proximity to any nearby assets and has offered no objection to the proposed development. The Glamorgan Gwent Archaeological Trust has not responded to the consultation. However, a heritage desk-based assessment has been undertaken which advises that the majority of the route will follow the line of pre-existing roads and sites of built infrastructure and will therefore be sited largely within already disturbed ground. Therefore, the potential for any impact is considered to be low. In the absence of any objection and having reviewed the desk-based assessment, officers are satisfied that development complies with policy SP9 and CE7. Finally, moving on to flood risk, the development is partially located within the flood zone C1 of the development advice maps and also flood zones 2 and 3 of the flood maps for planning. However, it is less vulnerable development and the FCA, the flood consequence assessment submitted, confirms that the storage of any construction plant, materials and fuel will not take place in the flood zone, and this is an approach supported by Natural Resources Wales. There are no concerns in relation to flood risk and the proposal is compliant with policy SP3. So in conclusion, overall it's concluded that the scheme is supporting the existing economic development within the local area and that data centre, and it can be constructed without resulting in any adverse impact to the material planning considerations outlined within the officer's report and summarised within this presentation. It is therefore recommended that the application is granted with conditions. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. Is there any questions for Grant? Councillor Mogford?
Yeah, I support this. I do have one question, though. It's a very expensive process to put these cables underground. So what sort of voltages are they carrying, and why would they not put them overground?
You bear with me. I don't have the power capacity to hand. I would, with regards to the overground, I don't know. I wouldn't like to speculate.
So this is not unusual then?
No, this is not unusual. We have granted permission for the exact same thing to another data centre to the east of this data centre. Again, cables under the ground following the highway. Due to the site area being less than 1 hectare in that instance, it wasn't a major planning application. It was a slightly shorter route, about 1 kilometre, if I remember correctly. So it was under delegated powers as opposed to coming to the committee like this today. But yeah, it's not unusual. I would say potentially with regard to any overground cables, potential visual impact or implications, given the designations of the area, whether there's any potential further ecological impact with flying animals potentially. But yeah, that's sort of all I'm able to comment on that.
Do you want to say anything? Okay, thank you. Councillor Screen?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm glad to see there's a note there on precautionary methods of working to prevent or reduce any disruption, although there's no housing as such in the area. And the tree protection plan, I think, is important. I think as councillors, we got no objection to this development taking place, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Jordan.
Yeah, thanks. It's just a bit of a comment, really. I just wonder why they're putting these applications in now. Why couldn't they do it when they were actually building the data centres themselves? You know, if they've already gone through one application and they've got another one, why didn't they put it through at the same time when they build it? Saves all the hassle, I suppose.
Yeah,
really.
It's a fair comment. This data centre that we're referring to, which will be powered by this, was granted permission in 2008. The first phase came into use in 2011. So it's only as that data centre is sort of being built out in separate phases does the increase in power supply is it generated. Also, I think what is a contributing factor is that was the original sort of data centre, I understand, within this area. As committee will know, there are other data centres sort of that have been approved and in construction at the moment, which are all tapping into the power supply. I think sort of the shift, these data centres, you know, they will hold a lot of information, data, and as the world is evolving with the way we communicate electronically and things like that with Microsoft Teams as we are today, those are the sorts of things that are that go through these sorts of data centres. So I think with the evolving, potentially back in 2008 when the initial permission was given, we might not have realised a decade later there'll be such more demand for this sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, the recommendation is to grant with conditions. Do I have a proposer, please? And a seconder, both. Thank you very much. All those in favour? We got it up. Yeah. Okay, you can vote on the screen as well now, ladies and gents. Okay, thank you. That's unanimous. Okay, thank you. So we go on to item number 4, which is 23/0872, and this will be presented by Joanne Davison, please.
Thanks, Chair. This is an application at 43 Truston Road for a rear single-storey extension. It's being presented to you today as the applicant is an elected member of the council. It is non-controversial. You'll see from the report that of the neighbours that were consulted, no one has responded. The extension will have an overall depth of 4.97 metres, a width of 5 metres and a height of 2.68. Nothing unusual particularly about that. It's considered to be of an acceptable scale and being located on the rear is not visible from the wider street scene. So looking at it on the floor plan, okay, so the existing floor plan, ground floor plan that is on the left, and then the proposed on the right. But hopefully the photos will explain better why we are not concerned with this scheme. You'll see that the adjoining semi has already extended themselves at ground floor. And so the intervening boundary with the adjoining semi already has the presence of buildings of a comparable scale on it. On the other side, in terms of the adjacent semi, so the one that isn't joined, they also have an extension. So extensions per se, not unusual. We have done the 45-degree light tests that the SPG advises us to do. They all pass. We've also done a 25-degree light display from this window in the adjacent semi, which serves a kitchen space that we do regard as habitable, and that passes. So all the tests pass. We have no issues with the design, no issue with impact on neighbours, and no objections to report, Chair. So we recommend it be granted subject to conditions.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, anybody have any questions for this?
Just one. Is it not permitted development? just outside, is it, sir?
The depth is too big to be permitted development.
Okay, thank you. No further questions? Okay, it's granted with conditions. Granted with conditions. Can I have a proposer, please, and a seconder? Thank you. All those in favour? Right, you can, that's it. Thank you. Unanimous? Thank you. All other information which is supplied is for information purposes only. Thank you all. All have a good Christmas, and I'll see you all in the new year, and it's a week later, okay? And yes, Taylor, can we get a meeting on next time?
Thank you, Chair. Goodbye, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you all the best.